Morning, Jay.
Morning.
Good to be here again. Here we are, May 20th already. Coming up on another Memorial Day weekend. Just hard to imagine the year is almost halfway gone in our 2025, and almost 2 weeks since Mom and I did our little beach escape. And while we were driving down and thinking about it, it was like, this is our first beach vacation in a lot of years. And we were trying to think back of when our last time was. And it was like, oh, geez, it was when we did our last Jamaica trip before you and Kristen were married. So it's like, damn, how long was that? So what is that, about 17? You've been married 17, right?
Yeah, I think it may almost be 20 because that was the summer after we graduated in 2004. So about probably 20 years. Yeah. 20, 21 years.
So it's crazy. I mean, we've had a lot of good vacations since then, but Mom and I are thinking, man, it's been that long since we had our toes in the sand and listening to the waves and being, for walks on the beach and whatnot. And always just good to be away at the beach. And it's like, geez, that's been way too long. And but while there and doing some reading, I kept thinking of the importance of authenticity in this encore phase of life. And all of what we've talked about and addressed and what I've written in Terry's thoughts, there does seem to be that underlying theme of what this part of our life is about. And it does fit in very well to what you've been preaching and working on in your Pursuit series and your own writings and work about, the authenticity of our life. And when thinking about all of that, I was reminded of a quote from Sally Hogstead, who says the goal is not to change who you are, but to become more of who you are at your best. And I think that fit very nicely into thinking of this encore phase of life, of our repurposing of our life and our goals at this phase to be more of our best when we have the opportunity now to be more of that best and the focus upon ourselves. Because like in our 15th episode, I think it was, you and I, kind of did the bit on authenticity, but it was more about, the baby boomer versus the millennium and our perspectives on that, and got you riled up on your passion of whether or not being authentic was just a buzzword rather than a real life drive of in use of your passion and repurposing yourself. So I thought it would be good to revisit that from the perspective of how I'm seeing it and how I'm living it and what I need to be doing more of, and how that fits into those listening in. Either you're preparing for your retirement, just living it, or maybe many years into it. That drive that we need to keep identifying what is our authentic life and how we need to better and align, as you say, the spirit, mind, and body, and what that means. Because when we're preparing for retirement, the traditional planning is always around the finances, and very little is done, I think, in the matter of, the social disconnect and the emotional transition that happens at this phase of life. Because, we've talked about it in the past. We spend so much of our time at work, and everything, and who we are is defined by our work and who we are during that time of work. And the idea, once we hit this retirement phase, our encore phase, and redefining it, that permanent vacation that we all see retirement adds to our life, wanes rather quickly. And rather quickly could be, still a matter of years, but in the scheme of things, it wanes very quickly. And then you're driven by those fears that surface. And what I've been reading, some retirees who've had to go back to work, those fears of not working any longer, losing our identity. Obviously, what is our new purpose in life? And for some, the idea of the fear of becoming a burden to our family. I don't know. Do you see some of those fears in family members from RLS Wealth, those who have been retired? Do you see any of that happening with them, or you've had conversations with folks along those lines?
I think there's always the concern of whether or not I'm going to be a burden to my kids. Like I don't want my kids to have to take care of me. I want to make sure that if I have to go into a facility, like they don't have to pay for that. And so that's a concern. But I also think it's one of those things that it is a concern but it's also one that we don't spend a lot of time on. I don't know if it's because we really don't think it's going to happen, or we just trust that whatever's going to have to happen will happen. And at that point, like, the best plans can be worthless at that time. So another thing that makes it hard is just like in that situation of being a burden to the kids, what are the options that people have? And usually the burden is either, my health isn't good enough that I can't live on my own, or financially I can't afford to take care of myself. I don't see many of my clients have the concern on the financial side. It's more on the health side. And so if we're trying to address the health side of things, there's really limited options on what can be done to protect against that situation. There's long-term care insurance, but that is waning. There's only a handful of companies, maybe just a couple companies, that offer those policies now. They're really expensive. The benefits aren't what they once were. And mainly that's because the industry got it wrong years ago, and they wrote these policies not expecting people to be in long-term care facilities for extended periods of time, and basically mispriced it back then and had to change the pricing today to make up for that mispricing back then, and it's too expensive. So long-term care insurance is really expensive. It's harder to get. There's a short window of where it makes sense, because you don't want to get it when you're too young, because statistically you're insuring against something that's probably not going to happen. But then you don't want to get it too late, because now it's too much. There's some hybrid products out there. Like there's some annuities that have a rider that if you go into long-term care facility, there's a multiplier on the benefit that can kind of help out. So there are some things to alleviate that concern, but really there's not a lot of great options. So it's almost like you have enough money to where you can self-insure, have enough assets to keep you where you want to be, and maybe you have less of a concern of having a big inheritance for your kids, or you have enough assets to where you can cover those expenses and have money go to the kids, or the kids have to help take care of it, or I go to a facility that is not the highest quality, but it's not a burden to my kids, and that's the best situation. Yeah. So there's a lot of variables that end up being out of our control, and I almost kind of like looking back, and obviously I wasn't alive or aware, but like in the early days, years ago, there really wasn't a need for long-term care because the family just stepped up. I look at like grandma moved to New Jersey, lived with Aunt Teresa for a while, and then eventually had to go somewhere. But like the family did as much as they could for as long as they could. Where today I feel like it's a lot of times it's get them into nursing home as soon as possible to not be a burden to the kids, which I understand, but I think it's cultural too. I think over in Europe, it's more family, and that's just part of what happens. We take care of our elders, and so then that alleviates the need for long-term care. I don't know if we make that shift here, but long-winded answer. Yes, it's a conversation point. Yes, it's a concern, but I don't see my clients spending a lot of time and losing a lot of sleep over it. It's just something every once in a while usually it's when we see somebody go into that situation to where it comes top of mind again. And then we look at the situation, we talk about the options, and then they make the decision they feel is best for them, knowing they have all the information they have in front of them today. Here's what they think is best. Yeah.
What about the kind of the identity, losing an identity or their purpose in life? Do you see a lot of that? I still sense that, and that's what I'm working hard to do for myself, is to continue to drive myself to, if you would, revisit what my identity is now or will be, what my purpose is or will be. Because again, we have what we hope is a long period of life ahead of us, and our life, we should be living our life the way we want to, and because we can now, we have the time. But it's also a driving force, I feel, to continue to refine that identity and that purpose. Again, when we're growing up, if you would, as we're maturing, as we come through the various phases of our life. I mean, before the children, we have that drive to, we're starting out a new relationship if we're married, and redefining that and preparing for having a family if that becomes a part of your life as a couple. And then as you have that family, you're driving so much of your identity and your purpose to that family in the years of the children growing up and getting them to where they need to be. And then as we have spoken and driven a couple of our episodes around, once we stop the work, we then need to focus more of the time on ourselves because we can. But even when we have that time and we're doing that, I think the struggle becomes, what is my identity? How far should I take that identity? For some, some that I know, individuals that I know, they're quite fine with retirement just doing nothing. That's what they worked hard to do to get to a point, and that's the end of it, and they're happy with what they have and who they are. There are others who are driven, I think, a little further into identifying that and becoming something they've not had the chance to do in life for whatever the reason that is, and there's multiple reasons for that. I think for me, as I'm seeing myself evolve, some have driven, by what I'm understanding more of today, even though I've had that feeling throughout my life. I'm identifying myself more of just relaxing and being more of who I am. Back to what, Sally's statement was. It's not changing who you are. It's just becoming more of who you are at your best. And I think I've always been able to do that, never really thinking about it, Also identifying what our newer goals should be at this phase of life, not giving up on goals. So just curious if any of the folks you come to work with or others you just have conversation, because I also think this is part of those who are watching or listening in, if you're preparing for it. I think it's important to recognize, again, all of your effort goes into the financial part of it. What's the number I need? And, I can tell you that the number isn't necessarily what you think it is or needs to be, depending on how you want to live this life. But I also think it's important to identify those intangibles of, your purpose, your identity, kind of the social disconnect that happens, because that shrinks, the social circle shrinks. And then you need to be content with what that is. And maybe that's the best thing. So we're not trying to keep proving ourselves to one another. And also I beginning to, and I chuckle every time because it's all about, I tell people, watch for the signs as well. You always talk about, be cognizant of the signs, what the universe is giving you. Again, this trip and our escape had a lot of that for me this time around. From driving down, we stayed halfway instead of doing the whole trip at the Gulf Shores, and our room number was 222. So again, kind of that angel number. Numbers are things that have come through my life as well. And it's not that the old sitcom drama series in my day, teenage years, Room 222 was a drama series that was very popular. But the number 222 has a significance, and it's about balance, harmony, and being aligned by the higher forces in their life. So that was kind of interesting to seeing that. And not only did we have the room number, but on the way back from the trip, we spent the night again. But when we were out at the restaurant, our receipt number was 222. So have it coming and going. Also seeing a lot of eagles, much like you. We saw some going down and coming back. So they're there. But also, what was interesting, I know I sent you a picture, but just wanted to show you a little bit more in person.
Yeah, I saw that.
A seashell. And I've never seen anything like that before, where there's actually initials that were somehow kind of carved into the shell, and the initials are yours and Kristen's. But interestingly, not just separate J and K, but in a way that you have the J and then the K on top. And when I envisioned having a little firm of my own, that was exactly how I envisioned kind of the trademark to be of J and K Group, was that way. So again, another sign of what's there. So my word is to everybody, pay attention to some of those things that come across, because they really do happen. And I see that on the trip.
I'm not surprised. I feel like you're more aligned now to be able to receive those, and also more aware of it. So I'm not surprised that you're having other. But going back to your question, yes, there are clients that have struggled with identity change in retirement. None of my clients have had any, that I know of, any depression or anything major from it. A lot of, because leading up to retirement, the conversation was, I always felt that it was. All right, so as I was saying, they retire to something, not retire from something. And having something to look forward to kind of keep you going, keep you sharp, is much better than just trying to get out of something and having nothing to do. So, I mean, I have a friend whose father passed away, and I don't know all the details, but he shared with me that when his dad retired, he went into a big depression because of the lack of identity. And the depression led to other things, which ultimately led to him passing away. So it definitely happens. But I think that, like, one of the things that I always try to bring as part of the conversation, like, I don't think I've ever had somebody start working with me in the year that they want to retire. So we're leading up to our planning. We know when we want to retire. And as the conversation goes, it started to identify, well, what are the things that you might want to do when you have more free time? And what I found out is a lot of my retirees are busier now than when they were working, but they're busier doing the things that they want to do. And I don't know if I just happened to attract people, because I wasn't really aware of this back in the day, that were already, aware of who they were, or had already not settled, but had accepted that the person they were is the person they wanted to be. Maybe if we did some deep work, they would go back and say, if I could do things differently, I would change. But they've accepted and are happy with the version of themselves they are. So I think that important thing leading up to retirement, the sooner the better. One, begin to figure out, like, what are the things that you would be interested in doing that can help create this new sense of identity. But even more important, like, go back to identity and disconnect your identity from your career. Like, you are not the profession. That just is what you happen to do. So figure out who you are and attach your identity to yourself, so that while important and a significant part of your life is your career, it doesn't define who you are. So when you drop that, nothing about you has really changed. And then you don't really have that obstacle of overcoming, well, who am I today if I'm not going into the office, if I'm not the attorney, if I'm not whatever it might be. You never were that. That's just what you did. And if you can begin to separate that, which is hard because that's not what we're taught. Like, the first thing that people ask you when you meet them is, what do you do? So just through normal course of human interaction, we begin to condition ourselves that we are what we do. And really, it's not. We are who we are. Tap into your authentic self. Figure out who you are. Find out your unique skills and gifts. And then, the career is just something that you chose to do. I think that's a big part of it. And not necessarily easy. Like this, I talk about it as if it's an easy thing. It's, just find your true self. Tap into your authentic self. It's not easy, but I do think it is the right answer for a lot of people. If you know who you are, then heading into retirement, into your encore phase, it shouldn't be a big change. Other than now you have more hours in the day to allocate in ways that are aligned with who you are and what you want to do.
Right.
And I don't think that, like, social changes when you retire, but I don't think it has to. You just find new people that you're surrounding yourself with. And truly, yes, your career, there's a social component to it, but how many of us work in an environment where the socialness of work is really the people we want to be around all the time? Like, we're social because we have to be, but if you get to pick who you spent most of your time with, would those people be it? There's some people who are in that situation, but most people not.
Right.
So I don't think that the social necessarily has to slow down and shrink. It can, but I don't think it has to.
Right. Oh, I agree. And I think those are very key points. And part of what I wanted to drive through today is that in preparation for this phase of life, beyond the financial, which is where we put a lot of our focus and our attention, and where the one-on-one comes with an individual and their financial advisor, life planner, those need to be stressed, I think, just as hard as the financial piece of it, to kind of do the exercise. And I have a few of these things written down here to think about, because it really does become a time for us to repurpose, kind of an active, deliberative drive with all of your accumulated, wisdom, experience, skills, talents, and passions, to reach a better self, to reach a better phase of who you are, assigning new goals, the goals that are more oriented to, yourself, your relationship, and also with your family. That changes as well. because now, being on the outside where, my children, you and Kristen, are very much into your lives, well into your lives development, and our lives now are around the grandkids, and our family unit is different than when you were younger, and Kristen were younger, or even in the college years. So it's a better time to think about what's the repurposing of our self going to be with that identity. And the social disconnect that I keep referencing is indeed a little bit of that circle, as you said. Yeah, we do it because that's part of what we have available to us, but it does consume a lot of our time when we're working. And you do have that association that you maybe readily tie to friendships, and some of them really do become strong friendships that last with you your life in a very different way as well. I have a handful of those from the working years that are still very close, even though we don't see one another face to face. We're still staying in a lot of close contact and what's happening in our lives, and you have that. But because as humans we're social beings, that can be a moment where everybody begins to falter. And as I've talked to some folks and as you read about it, that's one of the driving factors that people do, skip and trip over. Is that somehow they didn't really plan for that, or that becomes a bigger part of their life that they didn't have. So I'm just saying, as we think about this, as we prepare for it and go into it, don't discount that part, and you should prepare for and what that means in a different definition. And in doing so, the exercise should be, and you've mentioned a couple of these that I jotted down, and that was, imagine what are the things you want to be doing. It isn't just about just sitting down and doing nothing. As I said, that permanent vacation idea that happens about this phase of life does wane very quickly. But what are those things? I mean, you're right. I'm just as busy now as when I was working, even maybe a little more so. But they are the things that I want to be doing, and I can spend more time with it. Nothing gigantic yet, but it is nice to know that I know what I want to be doing during this time. So I think it's important for us to do that. You definitely have to stay active and involved and take care of your health. So kind of back to your point of spirit and mind and body, focus on those elements of yourself and drive those and identify what you can do about those things. I mean, as you know, Mom and I have had a very strong exercise routine, so we didn't lack that or needed to start it up, but we just can do more of it on a regular basis, and make it a more convenient time of our life on a consistent basis. So we have that going on in our life, which is important, especially this time of life, because as we do get older, things start to wear out, just like any sort of mechanical, object. Things wear out in time. Same thing with our bodies. Things wear out, and we have to prepare for that. One of these times, I'll have to talk to Mom about it to speak and address it more further, because I just don't want to. But the relationship is another area where you have to give some thought to and prepare for. And when I say that, I mean in such a way as you really have to consider what it's like to be with your spouse and partner all the time, all day, all the time, versus just the evenings or weekends when you're working. And even for myself, working remotely for a good number of years, that's still not the same as it is right now. And, I know if Mom were here and we were talking, she'd have a few things to say about it. But, you do have to think about that, because it is very different. And even though we're with one another all the time and have been before, we had those moments where we were apart, and that strengthens the opportunity. But now it's really like, okay, and also as you age, our tolerance for different things, slide a little bit as well. So you really do have to think about the relationship and have some good conversation about it, not just speaking about it, preparing for it, and deciding, can we do this right now, and have your spouse and partner on board with you when you think you make that move, and the impact to our lives. But also just the personal relationship that needs to continue to develop and grow, become stronger. You have to think about that. Just like, what are you going to do with your day? As you said, we're doing it, we're living it, and that's great. But what does that all mean when you wrap it all up together and,
Mm-hmm.
and make it part of your life? And then the other piece that you referenced too is, how are you going to feel when you're not who you are and doing what you did when you're working?
Mm-hmm.
As you said, we just kind of default to that. This is what I did in my life, so that's who I was. But now to kind of get ahead of not finding fault in who you are because you're no longer that, whatever it was you were doing when you were working, that becomes something, again, ties back to identity and purpose. But as you're planning and getting into this new life, it's important to consider just what all that really means.
Mm-hmm.
So do spend some time, going through the exercise, thinking about those intangibles, deciding what you're going to do to help yourself with that. And there's a lot of things we can do, but I think that we need to build that in our plan, just as we're deciding what we do from a financial perspective. We need to worry about these items and the kickback that goes on. And then the other is, how do you fit the relationship with your family? How much can you repurpose, and where do you fit in that? Is key too. We're fortunate enough to have both of you close by, so we get to be a part of the grandkids' life and witness and be a part. But for many, that may not be the case. But prepare for how important that becomes to you and where you need to go with it. I think that helps, right? I mean, if you can be a part of their life and they're a part of yours, that fills a lot of that, void that happens because, your kids are now adults and you can't tell them what to do. You can sit back and just enjoy who they are as parents, as parents, as young adults, as maturing adults in their own lives. But it also is something that you miss too. I think that filters in. And then all of that kind of intertwines to being, the struggle that we can fall into. I'm not finding that to be with me, because what I've seen myself doing at this time of life is a lot of what I'm doing. I just need to get better at relaxing around it all and not deciding this always has to be a part of where we're at here and there, right? I mean, that's just critical, just critical.
I want to go back to something you said a while ago. I don't retire entering the Encore phase could be, I think you said repurposing. Did you said repurposing yourself? For some people it is that, but I think the goal for retirement should not be a repurposing. It's just a continuation of who you were in the working years, just with more freedom. So that again goes back to detaching the identity from the career to the identity to who you are, to the self. You are that version of yourself. It just happens to show up in your career. So when the career goes on, you just continue being that person, and now you have more freedom to go with it. So I think for some people, because they get to retirement and they never separated the identity, it is a repurposing, and going through the process of figuring out who you are. And maybe it's therapy, maybe it's a retirement coach that we'll have somebody to introduce you to later this year, hopefully. Somebody to help you through that process to figure those things out, because you're going to go into it with blinders, and you need people to help you figure out who you really are and give yourself the permission to really tap into what you want. I think even going into retirement, if somebody hasn't made that separation, they're still going to be under the influence of society and other people, and you kind of have to get that away and figure out, well, who do you really want to be? Because now in the Encore phase, if you are going to repurpose, it's a clean slate. You have a blank canvas. Why would you not paint the version of yourself that you really want? But you have to get rid of all the noise that's influencing you to really figure out who it is that you want to be. Could be, who did you want to be all those years you never got to be? Great, go be that person. Or there's these things that I did that I really enjoyed, I just want to do more of it. Fine, but it all comes down to you. And then, so the goal would be to be a continuation, not necessarily a repurpose, if you can plan ahead of time and begin to figure out who you really are before you get there. And if you don't, then it is repurpose.
Yeah.
No big deal. The other thing I think is, I think this could be a great help to a lot of people in retirement. Not necessarily from the financial angle, but it could be there. But I think about anybody who's lived a long life, gotten to the retirement age, is in their encore phase, there's a lot of life experience and a lot of wisdom that can be shared with those who are coming from behind. And whether it is in the business world and the personal world, I think that people in the encore phase and people in retirement should consider like mentorship. And I think people who are earlier in life should think of having a mentor and investing in their future self by paying this mentor to help them. You don't have to. It could be a volunteer status. You could find somebody that you think you can help and meet with them regularly just to give them advice. But I think a lot of people are going to need some additional financial assistance going into retirement. And rather than go work at Starbucks, if you want to, that's great. But rather than go work at Starbucks, rather be a Walmart greeter, you have life experience. No matter how high up the ladder you climbed or wherever you have life experience that will be valuable to people. And I just think it'd be a really cool shift to see, and maybe people would exit the workforce earlier, knowing that on the other side of doing that, they're going to share their wisdom with other people and then be compensated for it because there's value behind it. So I think it'd be a really cool shift, is that, part of your encore phase is a number of years of coaching or mentorship or whatever you want to call it, that there is a financial component to it. And ideally, you're in a position to where you don't have to charge a lot to be to a point where someone who really could benefit from you can't afford it. But there's also an exchange of value of this person who is seeking your wisdom and knowledge and experience, values that and wants to compensate you for that. That helps you in the financial angle in retirement. I just think it'd be a cool dynamic, because going back to, taking care of our elders, I don't think we as society value the lessons that life teaches people to where we're learning that from people who have been there before us. So I just think that'd be a kind of a cool bridge into retirement, to have a little bit of financial support, to be able to give back and share, have that sense of purpose of like, I'm changing these people's lives by helping them figure things out way sooner than I did. And maybe you don't do mentorship, maybe you do a podcast. Maybe you do a podcast and you just recant your life lessons, what you learned, what you wish you knew, the experiences you had, how it shaped you, and just document that for other people to consume. I just think that there's something in your life experiences that are valuable to the world, and so many people die with those lessons and that wisdom never shared. Yep. And there's value to it, which would be helpful to a lot of people. And there's also value to the people who learn and receive it. So I just think that's something that would be pretty cool to be able to work into your plan into the encore phase. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a very, very wise summary and insightful. Also kind of a good little recap and plug of what we've been doing on this podcast, the last 19 episodes of my experience of transitioning and experiences through these first few years, mm-hmm. and what I've learning, what I've seen, what I've felt. But also I think your point is very well positioned, because we're seeing a lot of, if you would, what you just summarized happening throughout, our society in general. Mm-hmm. I mean, just the idea of retooling and finding those mentors and having that happen throughout the phases of life. Mm-hmm. I mean, likewise, when we're first, coming in, and as you have done, coming into your position, you've come across different individuals throughout your life that have crossed your path, that you've connected with, and some have acted as a mentor far beyond just the financial, planning phase of your life, but how you evolved into becoming a life planner and what that means, mm-hmm. and how that fits into all of this, and of defining who you are and what you want your life to be, and then how all the components stack up to get you where you want to be, and live your life, the entire life cycle, not just having it in phases, mm-hmm. which is what I think I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing, is that what I've been speaking about in my experiences and our exchanges have been about transitioning to this phase of life. But as you just summarized, it should be more of, we should do this throughout our entire life. So it does become that continuation, mm-hmm. and there is no phase. It's just life. And as people, we keep evolving.
But that's gonna take a shift in the narrative of what we're supposed to do. Like that's not what's laid out in front of us. So it's gonna it needs to be a universal shift in this is how we should approach life. And I don't know, if I'm being honest, I don't know if we ever get that where the masses approach life that way.
No, I agree with you. I don't think that we can in the same way that we've seen the shifts throughout the various evolution of our world and society, where we went from the agricultural to the industrial phase, and the tech phase, and then whatever the hell it is that we're in now, phase, where we had those shifts occur, major shifts, but the shifts now are a little more subtle. Some of it, albeit driven by technology and what we can or cannot do with it, or where it's leading us. We don't even, we can, but I don't think it's the proper time to do it. But, just what AI will do to influence all of this and where the world will go. I mean, Who knows what it's going to be like. But just listening to you making that summary, that's, what I've written here about the repurposing is that active, deliberate redirection of everything that we've had into something new. But you're right, Jay, absolutely right. It shouldn't be that it's just in this phase of life. It should be always. The plug that you've put for someone and to share those experiences of being mentors, I think it's just an extension and a shift that you've been talking about in your industry as financial advisors, trying to make that shift that you're leading and you're driving from your perspective and what you're doing with, life design and alignment plus in your work, getting financial advisors not just to be about the money and charts and graphs, but to be about the life planning, be a life planner with a financial component and putting more emphasis on those intangibles as you do when you speak to the spirit, mind, and body. I'm seeing that in this phase of life where the repurpose has to be on yourself. Again, I never thought about it growing up, maturing, getting myself to this point. I mean, life went on. I did what I had to do and was always happy about that. But as I sit here today and see myself 3 years into it and knowing what's ahead, I'm understanding that it is more about me and what that means to Mom and myself, and for us, to you and your family and Kristen and her family, and then, the sisters and sisters-in-law and their families, and what that all means as a family unit. Because as I'm sitting here today, also I look at it and go, the greatest generation is in our family is just about gone. I mean, we only have Aunt Lucy and Uncle Ray. We don't have everybody else. So now, where I'm sitting and all of my cousins, we're now the old guard. And what reminded me of that is just the other day, coming out of the locker room at the Y to go hit my workout. Some young man, as those doors are, you don't know who's coming or going. As I opened the door, he stopped. He was just about coming in, and he said, "Oh, excuse me, OG." And I went, "My goodness, being called OG." It's like, okay, so I guess I am an OG, and accept that as being a compliment. Had a good chuckle on that one. But it fits into this idea that we don't spend enough time on the intangibles. And I would like to say at this phase of reflecting that the intangibles become maybe a little bit more in the forefront than the financial. Because the financial, I know it doesn't take care of itself, so let me have the license to say that it does. Because if you set up the right discipline and right plan, as you said, it does take care of itself. If you're doing your, pay yourself first, when you start the work and you contribute as much as you can to a 401k, letting the compounding over the years help do the kind of rebalancing you need to do. It does kind of take care of itself if you stay that discipline. The things that don't take care of themselves are the intangibles of making sure you're staying disciplined, taking care of your health, taking care of your body, and your mind's critical to it. And for me, the rejuvenation, for the beach vacation, nothing like that. Sitting there listening to the waves, the whole meditative state of just having that happen, the relaxation that takes part of your body, and the way you feel is how you should feel this phase of life. That should be an everyday feeling. When you wake up, that's where you're at. And I think that's critical because we need to keep moving forward, with a lot of enthusiasm and eagerness to be more relaxed, to be happier with who we are, and not fighting that constant struggle of trying to define, am I doing enough? In doing, I kind of reread the book Relentless by Tim Grover. And I know it's driven a lot more to, his work with athletes. But in it, he talks about, as we are, when we're babies, we're relentless. But when we grow older, we relent. And there's a lot of truth to that, right? I mean, when we're young and you watch children, they just are who they are. They do what they want. They don't worry about consequences. That's who they are. And then as we get older, we relent because some of it's driven by disciplines that we become a part of. And that's why I think I kind of use the repurposing, because if I think of that statement from Grover of relenting through the years, we have to come back to being relentless and being that child and just being happy and relaxing and not worrying about anything. So I think that's why I use the repurposing to get us there and to do what we can with all of that energy in a better place. So I'm going to check on the time because you've got an appointment coming up. So I just want to wrap it at that moment of saying our revisiting of being authentic is critical to this phase of life, because that's the importance of why we're here and what it should be for the years ahead of us. And so with that pursuit of our authentic life, stealing your theme, that becomes, I'm feeling, more critical to this phase of life, so that you can be happy and have a fulfilling encore without any hesitation of accepting that that's the way it will be. It's not a permanent vacation. It shouldn't be. We should continue to want to grow, have goals, but they should be more relaxed. And I think that's critical to where I'm at this phase and what I'm seeing and feeling. And with that, I we'll just wrap it up by always talking about, never quitting, never keep searching, and always look to keep that purpose in front of you is critical to all of us. So Jay, as always, appreciate your time. It's always good to be here. Hope we can continue this, and have a good day.
All right. We'll keep on doing it. No reason to stop.
Right.
All right. You have a good one, too.
Adios.